At boarding schools during winter break, oftentimes some students have nowhere to go. It could be because the travel is too far or too expensive, or simply because their parents have other plans. When this happens, one of the faculty members is selected to reluctantly serve as chaperone to the Holdovers. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm leaving the theater. All right, this is Ronald, and I am leaving the theater after seeing The Holdovers. The Holdovers, written by David Hemingson, directed by Alexander Payne, starring Paul Giamatti, Dominic, Sessa, Divine Joy Randolph, Carrie, Preston, Gillian, Vigman, and Tate, Donovan. And as always, for a complete cast listing, you can go to the link in our show notes. All right, it's just me today. It's going to be just me for most of November. I think all of November. I don't even know why I said most. It's going to be me. But yeah, this is the time of year. It gets colder. The screenings come a lot faster because at the end of the year, they're all at weird times. It's harder to get people to, clear their schedules and be on the show. So it's just going to be me. So I hope y'all are ready for that. Today's movie, The Holdovers, it is a movie starring Paul Giamatti, who is a teacher at a boarding school, and he is assigned the task of watching the kids who are not going home for winter break, who are then kind of stuck holding over until school is let back in. So they're there over Christmas through New Year until everyone comes back to school. It's meant to be one of the worst jobs, like no one wants to do it. And incidentally, Paul Giamatti is not a beloved teacher. He's known as kind of a tough cookie. He grades the students hard, and he's actually being punished because he graded one of the students too hard. They failed, and as a result, they weren't able to go to the college of their choice. This was the senator's son, and this ends up being kind of one of the subplots of the movie. This movie is very much set at Christmas time. I would definitely call it a Christmas movie, but it's a Christmas movie in the way that I actually really enjoy Christmas movies, where it's a movie that's set at Christmas that's not about Christmas, which I think are, secretly for me is kind of my favorite type of Christmas movie. That's probably why I like Die Hard so much. Maybe we'll talk more about that later. But I think this movie is kind of built around these kind of relationships that are occurring as the movie goes on. So, of course, we're in this situation where they're stuck with their teacher in what feels like a punishment for these kids that are all in boarding school. And they're all varying ages, but typically from middle school to high school aged boys. And here they are trying to, just kind of be young people, and it just feels like the teachers are doing the same thing that teachers always do, which is stop them from having any fun. What unfolds as it goes is kind of just very thoughtful and insightful movie that is really about grief. That's really about grieving your decisions, grieving actual, physical loss, and kind of grieving existential loss. And there's so many people in this movie that are grieving in different ways. Paul Giamatti is grieving more of an existential loss. We have Divine Joy Randolph, who works in the school cafeteria. She's the cafeteria manager, and she is grieving the loss of her son, who, and you'll get into the movie and see why that happens. Eventually in the movie, we are stuck between the three people, Paul Giamatti, Dominic, Sessa, and Divine Joy Randolph, who eventually end up being three people that come closer together as the movie goes on. And we're kind of watching their relationship kind of unfold. And it's really just nice to watch them. It's nice to watch these three folks kind of deal with life and kind of unlikely become support for one another at a time when, people feel very alone. The Surgeon General says that right now we're kind of in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, as he calls it, here in the United States, where a lot of people are feeling lonely, and a lot of people feel like they're down on themselves, they're hard on themselves. And this is a movie about three people who are kind of doing that, and as a result, they cope with it in various ways. And this coping kind of changes as they meet each other and they start to interact with one another in a way that then becomes constructive. And I think like one of the things that I like about it is that it doesn't really shy away from the fact that everyone has problems, but it kind of also points to the fact that these are people who, in the face of their problems, are still continuing on. There's no, it doesn't treat any of the issues in the movies as being so hard that they won't wake up and soldier on to the next day. And I think there's a lot of movies that kind of deal with this in a much more dire way. And I guess what I'm saying is that kind of grounds this grief in this way that we kind of deal with grief today, like the way we deal with grief right now, which is that like we still got to wake up and do stuff. We still got to go work our jobs. We still have to find out how we're going to pay our bills, all of that. And these folks the time is passing, and that's kind of what they're doing, and they're doing it at the time of year that we're upon right now. This movie is actually opening holiday season for us. So it's that time that we're in now where we start to say like, hey, I'm upset, I'm depressed, I don't like what's going on in my life, and I still have to wake up every morning and do everything that I was going to do anyway. Like I still have to pay bills, all that stuff. And maybe some days are harder than others. Maybe I'm wallowing some days, but I still got to wake up and do that. I think watching this, especially in the time when, I get the holiday blues. I didn't used to, but I get a lot of them probably in the last like 5 or 6 years. I get them a lot. And watching this, I felt remarkably optimistic about the idea of being able to soldier on and being okay eventually. You know what I mean? Like these are folks that maybe didn't have the outcomes that they wanted or didn't have the things that they wanted, but like, hey, maybe even without those things, we could find a way to like meet other folks and have a new chosen family and a new support system and still figure out like what tomorrow looks like, even though it's not what I expected. And I think that's a powerful message in this movie. And I didn't cry, but I teared up a few times, and it was, in kind of the unlikeliest of places. But this movie isn't one that's trying to like draw tears out of you. A different version of this movie, I think it would have been trying to like really draw out emotion in a way that I don't know would have been very constructive, or it would have been maybe I'd be like saying, oh my God, it's a tearjerker, real tearjerker. And there's holiday movies that are like that. I remember there was one a few years ago, The Family Stone, I want to call it, and it was the same thing. It was just like they were just hiding this tearjerker this entire time, and all of a sudden everyone's crying. And this is like not that. There is like death, there is grief, but it's not in the sense of it's more ordinary. It's more of the way that we deal with it today, So for that reason, I think this is a very good movie. I think there's some acting nominations probably to be given out in this. I think Divine Joy Randolph is a brilliant actor. I think she, I know her from Only Murders in the Building, where she gets to have a lot more fun just being very exasperated with people taking the law into their own hands. Whereas in this one, I feel like she, there's still a bit of that exasperation, but it's a much more on a lower level, which I think really shows a bit of her range. And I really enjoyed watching that. Paul Giamatti is just, he is America's treasure, Paul Giamatti. This was a role that was built for him. He always has that same world weariness, that same idea of like having the weight of the world on his shoulders and having to deal with everything that comes with that. And this one, he's a little bit more sharp, a little more acerbic. I think that's the word in it. But I think that's still that same like lovable Paul Giamatti is coming through. And it was good to see him in this. It was good to see him like in a role like this where I think he could get nominated. I think he did a great job. So yeah, with all that being said, I think this is a solid, a 4-star movie. I think it's a solid 4-star movie. I think it was a little bit slow at times, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But I think there were parts in there where it was picked up enough that I thought, maybe they can hasten on with the rest of this as well. And I don't know that I would watch it again. I don't know. I don't know that I would watch it again. I enjoyed it, but it just felt like I did it once and I learned the lessons that are there. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that this wasn't like well made, well constructed. And I really applaud them for sticking with the 70s style of filmmaking, where it looks like it was made in the 70s, even though it was made like now, but it would look like it was made in the 70s, and they did a very good job of that. Not just the filter, but everything from the shots they picked, from like, the way they're mostly from the shot picking, to be honest, like the way they're framing everything, like it just, you can really tell that they really cared about the aesthetic of this movie, so it worked out. So yeah, 4 of 5 stars. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios. Alexandra Ketch of Bias Studios mixes the show. Thank you, Alex. Show art from Heather Wilder. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. For more information about the Holdovers, check out our show notes. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or Threads at Oh It's Big Ron. That's at OHITSBIGRON. You can find out more about this show and other Oh It's Big Ron Studio shows by following us on Instagram at Oh It's Big Ron Studios and on Twitter at Oh It's Big Ron Stu. That's STEW. Leaving the Theater will be back soon. Thanks for listening.